right, everybody, we are so close to 400 episodes, and we've been saving this one for a long-ass time, but the 30-year anniversary of Dead Alive is here. It's January.
We made it, everyone.
Yeah, everyone, it's okay. It's okay. But I thought, what a good excuse to sit down and watch a movie that I, throughout my high school and early college years, watched on a regular basis, and then probably have not actively put this movie on in over a decade, if not longer.
Yeah, I think the same thing. I was like, when was the last time I watched this? Because my first note is, well, after the lambasting that everybody's been giving me for not jizzing my pants over Streets of Fire, I'm like, I don't even want to touch a classic like Dead Alive. And then, and so my first note is like, man, this is going to be bad because I'm going to be critical of it, and because I haven't watched it in like a decade easily. And then, 10 minutes in, I'm like, this is a good time. And 20 minutes in, I'm like, this is the best decision Matt has ever made for the show. And I was 30 minutes in, I'm like, I hope this never ends.
Well, you know what?
It's so good.
You know what it is, and I was thinking about this because Dead Alive, I think, just got wrapped in to the overall zombie movie exhaustion that we all experienced for the last 10 years.
Yes.
But the big difference is, like, this has to be, if not the number one, in the top 3 most innovative and creative variety of zombies. Like, they really, like, go out of their way to make every single one of them look and feel different. Like, there's no rhyme or reason to them. It is... Because you think about even, like, I love Return of the Living Dead. And I think Return of the Living Dead is the only other movie that I can even think of that would go into competition of, like, oh, there's definitively different zombies. Like,
sure, yeah.
So many of the other stuff is, like, they find a zombie look and they work with it, and it's just, like, a different variety of rot. But, like, I wrote down, like, just in the party scene alone, in the in the third act of this movie, which is so fun. The third act of this movie is so fun. But you have, like, a pair of living intestines running around
that look at themselves in the face and they're like, and they also make fart sounds instead of talk, which I think is hilarious.
You got the body that's attached to a light bulb, so the whole head is glowing. You've got the person whose face was ripped off, so they're just like a skull. There's the head that was decapitated, so it's got a garden gnome for a head.
You're listing these. I was going to ask a favorite. Finish your thought, but I wanted to hear. I wanted to see if anybody had a favorite.
All of them, and for me, like, my absolute favorite shot in this movie, my favorite version of any zombie in this movie, I love after the uncle's killed, and it's this weird, like, hunched over body with this spine sticking up and the head floating on the top. It's like they really went out of their way of, like, not only are we going to make a zombie movie, but we're going to throw out all the laws of zombies because headshots don't mean shit in this movie whatsoever. No. And we're just however you get massacred, you are a zombie in that form.
I think that the nice thing about this is that it's not a contagion; it's supernatural. Yeah. And so it's literally like if you are killed by a zombie or scratched by a zombie or whatever, I suppose, you are going to turn into a zombie. Like, it's as long as you get hit by that dark magic, you become a zombie, and that's what makes it so much fun. It's like that's the only rule. There's no other rule for this movie. It's hard for me because I think I have to go with Lightbulb Head Lady just because it's just so iconic, and then her head like bursts into flame at a certain point. And I also love that this movie is 1993, and since it's New Zealand, everything is like a decade behind New York City, and so we get everybody dressed up in late 50s outfits. They're dancing to 50s music. There's greasers. All the women have beautiful, like, bob haircuts. Yeah, I was wondering if I missed a thing that had, like, a timestamp of, like, oh, it's 1963 or something. I'm pretty sure this is just New Zealand 1993.
Yeah, I think New Zealand just looks that way.
Yeah.
The light bulb lady is mine too. I just think it's so simple and so effective that I love it. In the face of so much so much. In the face of so much happening,
So
it's like just a simple thing. I love it.
So I just checked, though. It does say under the wiki plot, the first word is in 1957. So it is a period piece. It's a period piece.
Holy shit. The fact that I didn't know that after all these years. This movie was one of the last movies that I finally conquered in my like senior year of high school, because I was like, this is like the goriest movie. It's like a splatter fest. This was like the early days of the internet. There weren't like, a lot of...
This box art held back nothing.
I know. The thing that, between this and Luther the Geek, so those were the last two horror movies that I watched due to my fear of the covers, right?
Yeah.
It's weird because they're very similar shots on them. On the back of Dead Alive, it's the guy who's getting his rib cage ripped out.
Yep.
That fucked with me so bad as a child that I was like, nope, I don't want to watch this movie. And it took me until I was 18 to watch it finally. Then with Luther the Geek, it was the guy who had his chest all chewed up by Luther and his nasty metal teeth. So it's
by his Invisalign.
Yeah.
his Visalign.
His Visalign.
His Visalign.
It's so funny because Kyle is just I was like never going to pick Luther the Geek for the show. Kyle kind of just sold it for me.
Yeah, there we go. Well, it's funny. Jonathan literally just sent me, I guess, one of the multiple Instagram pages that just post clips from movies, posted a Luther the Geek one recently because he sent it to me.
Wow.
I wanted to call out because you're telling your story of the VHS case, and this was one that scared me before I started watching horror movies, for sure. Like, this was one where I saw the front cover at the video store and was like, huh. And then I flipped it around and it was like, oh, God.
Yep.
But you have to remember that one of the first movies that made me get into horror films was watching Frighteners. And I think it was the second that I found out that the guy who made Frighteners made Dead Alive, I was like, let's fucking go. So I think I watched this movie when I was like 12. I think me and my friends
apart?
About so, yeah.
93, 95 versus 93, 96.
I'm 95, so 93, 95.
So 2 years. Was Frighteners what he went to after doing this movie?
Or no, 96. Frighteners was 96. So 3 years split. It was this, Heavenly Creatures, Frighteners, Lord of the Rings.
And I started watching the extended cut of Fellowship of the Rings last night when I couldn't sleep. And I watched about maybe 10 minutes, fell asleep. 3 hours later, it's not over yet.
Yeah. But here's the thing, and it's
Insane.
worth celebrating because I don't think that we'll ever see Peter Jackson make another movie like this.
No.
But what I do appreciate about Peter Jackson and Sam Raimi is that they have taken themselves from these obscure, at the time, low-budget splatter films into literally like Spielberg level directors, where it's like when their film comes out, it's a big deal. They're up there with a Steven Spielberg and a James Cameron. But you can tell in even the most mainstream films that they make that their heart and soul still lies in their horror roots. So much so that apparently I haven't watched this movie since it literally came out, but in his 3-hour version of King Kong, there's literally a crate that says Sumerian rat monkey across the side of it when they're in a plane. Like, he knows.
You just gotta hold on to those things. And, like,
I love that beautiful for him.
Yeah, I do. I fucking do. I love that for him.
Yeah. So let's talk about this movie though, because kicking it off.
I used to get the cover confused with Bulworth. So
had
somebody coming out of a mouth.
That is
So this is actually only the second watch for me.
Really?
I couldn't do it. Like, I've watched a lot of gross shit. Purposefully, and that first dinner sequence.
Oh, the custard.
The custard scene.
It's. I have a note that's like, this is still the most fucking disgusting thing I've ever watched for this show.
So did you hear?
Foul.
Did you hear that the New Zealand ratings board loved the movie so much and thought that it was so playful that they wanted it to give it what would be the equivalency of a PG-13 rating? But
they're crazy down there. They're fucking nuts.
Well, also, the movie made more money per screen than Batman Returns in New Zealand at the time that it came out. Like,
wow.
New Zealanders fucking ate this shit up. Like, and that's why he was given those bigger budgets to do stuff like Heavenly Creatures and Frighteners that eventually proved that he could do Lord of the Rings, which is what I do think is so interesting about Peter Jackson and Wingnut Productions, is that he's a really good director.
Yeah.
He's got a great sense of humor in his writing, but the man is like super hands-on with his special effects too. So you've got this dude who like all the way back in 1987 is like, let's figure out how to make people vomit with like no money. And then was so successful at it. People were like, well, here's money. Can you make things that don't necessarily make people vomit? And he's like, yeah, let's figure it out. Like,
yeah, we can do that.
He's literally, I guess, as I'm making all these comparisons, the person he's most comparable to is like a George Lucas. Like, you look at like what George Lucas did in 1977 with the first Star Wars movie, and it's like, oh, well, if that's what he can do with a very low budget as like a indie filmmaker, essentially, let's just keep tossing him money and see what he can do. Now, unfortunately, both of them have a similar trajectory of like they started to make bad movies.
Wait, what are Peter Jackson's bad movies?
I don't think King Kong is that great, and it certainly doesn't need to be 3 hours long. And I wasn't blown away by Lovely Bones either. But
those are neither of those have graced my eye holes.
Yeah, and the Hobbit movies are mostly unnecessary.
Did he do those though? Or
He did all 3 of the Hobbit movies too. Yeah. So
I think that they were just like, here's a CGI fest. He's like, that's fine. I'll take the paycheck.
I've talked about this on a couple podcasts before, but I am obsessed with this weird trait. I mean, timely because that 90s show will be on Netflix by the time this episode comes out. But Topher Grace has this obsession with re-editing things. So he infamously...
What?
Yeah, he found a love for editing. So, like, he made the Topher Grace cut of the Star Wars prequels where he took all 3 movies and re-edited it down to an hour and 45-minute movie that just hits all the plot points.
Oh, that's his?
Yeah,
I've heard about it. I didn't know it was Topher fucking Grace.
Topher Grace. But he also did the definitive Hobbit where he's like, let's just get this down to the bare essentials, and took those 3 movies and edited it down to like an under 2-hour movie that just follows exactly the book of the Hobbit with no like divergence into like weird subplots.
I mean, I guess doing the Lord's work.
Yeah.
I
think one of the other ones
we don't know which Lord it is, but we
one
do
of the other
know.
ones was that. Oh, what was that sound?
That was "Let's Kill the Pain." And look, there's a rat monkey riding a pill rocket.
Love it.
I have one too.
It's a painkiller inspired sour. What do you got?
I have Headhunter, which is because I was like, I have to have a beer, and this is my favorite beer probably of all time. And because I had to have a beer because Bread Alive.
Oh, God damn it. All right. So, I mean, we've been jumping
Very
all
nice.
around. I doubt that someone subscribing to Horror Movie Night is listening to this episode with no knowledge of the movie, so we don't really have to cover any of the main bits. But there are parts I want to bring up. First of all, when I hit play on this movie, one of the things that I did not realize was still very fresh in my head was how quickly I remembered the theme music to the opening of this movie. Like, it's cheap.
You're alone in that.
It's like a cheap Casio keyboard type song, but I was like, oh, I remember this song. Like, I definitely remember this. When I first bought this on VHS, accidentally bought the R-rated version of this movie, and I have never owned something more worthless. like the way I think the movie is literally loses like 20-something minutes of footage.
Holy
like
shit.
it is like 80-something minutes long on a movie that's an hour and 40 with like the gore cut out. And I remember distinctly the opening scene. This is why I wrote this down. When he gets like kicked off the back of the truck and they're like Singaya or whatever they're saying,
that's
and
right,
they bring up the knife, it would just cut to like a very zoomed in of his face screaming every time that it would normally cut to the limbs being cut off. And that was how the whole movie was edited. Like, let's just zoom in on someone's face yelling and not show even 1 second of blood or gore anywhere. It's
a bad start.
Wild. Oh my!
That's a bad start. If you have knowledge of what this movie's going to provide and offer you, it's a bad start.
And I had seen the unrated. Like, I had rented the unrated and then bought the VHS at the store.
Damn shame.
And within like 5 minutes, I was like, I've made a mistake. And I like looked at the back of the box and saw the R and was like, oh no.
Dude, I not forget because like I said, I've only seen it twice. But when we talk about horror comedies, I feel like this isn't on the list often. Maybe
No,
I'm
it's
just
not.
like
No, you're right. I think it's just too old.
it's got to be too old. Like, it's not in a horror comedy boom that people gravitate towards to talk about.
Well, it's also in the early 90s, which is such a bad time historically for horror. Like, people were not seeing horror movies.
We're literally doing at least a month and a half, if not 2 full months of 1993 releases in a row. I hope you guys noticed this.
I did.
I would put money down, in all honesty, Scott, that if you were to look through our back catalog and pick out the episodes that we liked the most, I think an overwhelming amount of them would be between 1990 and 1995. Like, because
I think
these
it's
movies,
also because we didn't grow up with them and we're coming to them as adults, like with fresh eyes. I don't know.
I have gone on the record that I love the 90s. I think that the 90s, the first half of the 90s has, I know, shocker. But no, like 90s horror in general, like I feel like there is the pre and the post Scream, and I'm for both of it. Like the pre Scream is so weird and wacky, and then like the post Scream world is so like every movie feels like a Dimension Films format that it's like you could put on a movie from 1998 that you've never seen in your entire life, but if you've watched like more than 3 movies that were inspired by Scream, it immediately feels like this nice, comfortable place that you've been a million times. Like it's So I'm all for it. Almost any 90s horror movie, I have a soft spot for.
Yeah.
And didn't we get 2 Metamorphosis movies in 1992? So
yeah,
I mean,
year.
You gotta love the beginning of the 90s too.
It's a great place to start. I do wonder what the most talked about year like that we've had on the show is.
I can find that out.
I was gonna say Scott's got a nice Excel
I'm making a goddamn note.
That'd be nice stats. I love these stats. But I just it's the fucking movie is so funny. And I think it's like it makes it especially funny because they don't wait for a laugh. Like there's no like for me, I didn't notice myself sort of like being like, oh, they paused for the laugh.
They do
like
not. No.
They're the pacing of the comedy is perfect. It's fucking perfect.
The example that I want to I'm sorry for
interrupting. No.
The example of that I think is fantastic is the Nazi vet.
Yeah, it's there for no reason.
He's just like a wacky character, and then he rips the sleeve of his lab coat or whatever when he's grabbing the tranquilizer, and you see his his swastika, and he goes he says something in the accent, and then it's the end. It's like that's it. You don't see him again. It's funny because it's so abrupt, and it's that pacing there, the cuts are just so perfect.
Yeah. Oh, it is, and it's not the same as like British comedy. Like you could say, sort of does a similar thing, but at the same time, I feel like they're not as funny.
Well, no,
they take themselves way too seriously, even in a comedy setting.
Yeah, it's definitely a different type of humor, but I definitely think that New Zealand comedy definitely fits more into British comedy than American comedy still.
Yeah, for sure.
Like it's more closely related. For sure.
They're more closely related. But like, this is a prime example to me of like the sense of what this movie was supposed to be. Right? Like this movie was a comedy out the gate. That's what he was making.
Yeah.
And I read this story that I thought was really interesting, which was like he wanted to make it for $6 million. He got half that. He got $3 million. And then he finished filming the movie, and they still had budget left over. So the scene with the baby in the park was shot after the fact just because they had money to burn. And it's like he had a couple extra $1,000 to burn so that they could film some extra stuff. And he's like, let's do like a wacky slapstick comedy.
Let's do something outside, minimal. It's fucking brilliant because like that truly is the cheapest thing you could do, and he chose to do it.
Guys,
he didn't.
And it's probably the most memorable. Like people when they think about this movie, they're like, oh, the baby in the park scene is like what a lot of people. It's that the third scene.
It's what my wife is going to think about because she's never seen and will never watch all of Dead Alive, but I'm watching this on my work computer during lunch like 2 days ago, and not on my work computer, but on my other computer. I wasn't eating lunch at the time. I mean like I was on break, my lunch break. It was like 12:30, and I'm working my way through Dead Alive, and she walks by and she was like, what the fuck is that zombie baby doing? Like, zombie baby was a question inside the question of what is that thing doing? And I was like, oh, is this movie called Dead Alive? And it's supposed to be silly, and it's like a zombie. It's like a zomkitty or what? I don't know. I had some nickname for it. And she was like, that looks fucking stupid. And I said, yeah. and she was like, that baby doesn't even, that's just a person in a big onesie. I'm like, yeah.
What, has she never seen Alf? Like, this is
it was just funny because she is so hip to almost everything. Yeah. It was so refreshing to hear like a quote unquote normal person have like this flat reaction to what is like, I think I take Dead Alive for granted. You know how absurd this fucking movie is. And he puts the baby in a bag and he's like punching it in the fucking head, and he punts it across the park, and Megan was like sort of stopped dead in her tracks because she was transfixed by the stupidity. And I was like, it's supposed to be dumb. It's supposed to be dumb.
Well, that's a good point. I feel like I do take it for granted too, because watching it this time, that first time it disgusted me, and I was totally turned off from it. But like now I'm like, oh, I've seen a lot of shit now in my time that is, I don't know, like just not fun.
That's the thing.
You know?
This was, for a long period of time, this was considered the goriest movie ever made. I feel like it still hasn't been topped, but maybe it has. But the big difference.
What's the quantifier for that? Is it gallons?
Well, this
of
is
blood used?
this is quality and quantity, and I think that like there's some sort of hybrid. But
this also hits that beat that Trauma cracked so quickly, which is like, at a certain point, gore just becomes funny. Like, when there's just so much of it, it becomes funny. So it's like, lean into it. And that's like, you get something like the opening scene of Terror Firmer, where someone rips off someone's leg, and it's like literally a fire hose of blood is like spraying out of the stump. And it's so much blood that it becomes like a Three Stooges bit more than like something that's actually horrifying. And now we're leaning into this thing where I don't want to keep taking shots at the same fucking movie every single time.
Oh no, here it comes.
But then you've got something like Terrifier, where the gore is presented in a way where it's like, we want to make sure that every person has a vomit bag beside them while watching. And I'm like, that's not fun to me. Like, this is fun
it's
to
just,
me.
It's edgy. It's too like, it's self-aware, but it's trying to offend. Whereas like. And I'm not saying that Dead Alive wasn't trying to offend in some way as well, like sensibilities.
It's very lighthearted though. Like, I get
the charmingness of it.
Yeah,
yes.
And I get why. Like, I think what's interesting about that story, where like the people in New Zealand wanted to give it a PG-13, makes sense to me, because you have to think that like everywhere else is less oppressed than America with their rating system.
We started with fucking Puritans, like, it's of course.
But it's like they looked at this and they're like, yeah, this is bloody as hell, but like, who could ever take this seriously?
Right. And there's no real boobs in this movie.
There's no real like scares. Like, it wasn't like there was, like there's no, everything's like, every person and everything is there and presented as there. Like, there's very few scares, except maybe the big mama monster at the end, like sort of like the illusion or the leading up to that. But it's like, that's really Goosebumps level shit. I mean, we're watching we're watching the hands come out of the dark, and it's like, I mean, that's the scariest thing. Quote unquote,
there's so much I like about this movie. Also, in the sense of, you are like, I don't think I ever truly realized this until this watching. Or maybe I realized it when I was 20 and then forgot because I didn't watch it for 17-something years.
Yeah.
But like, in my mind, I was always like, yeah, this movie's got a ton of great practical effects and there's a claymation monkey. But it's like, man, they employ puppetry in this. They employ a lot of claymation. They employ a lot of stop motion, like
miniatures,
like, reverse shots, like all of the stuff with the intestines.
The intestines. I didn't notice that the miniature of the giant mom going up the stairs until this watch.
Yeah,
and like,
so
forced
good.
Perspective and miniature shit.
Yeah,
it was so good.
It's super impressive what they did.
It is.
The only other thing that I have written down that I want us to discuss is, like, we did mention the dinner and the custard scene, which is super effectively gross. but like
grosser than
ear.
the second dinner scene, which has all the like it's somehow like
when
that.
they're eating eggs, it's
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
got to be something
It's
like
something
yellow
fucking gooey
and nasty
and, God.
yeah.
It's phlegmy.
And also, that's not how you eat. Like,
no.
I've never
Don't
seen
cook
anybody
your
eat
eggs like that.
I know they're zombies or whatever, but
they
please
deserve to be
make them
treated with
they
respect.
deserve cooked eggs for the
also,
love of God.
cook those eggs a little bit more. Those
little
were some runny
fucking
ass
more.
eggs.
But there are so many gross scenes that or moments that are like, oh, that does make me feel a certain way. And like the two that I wrote down that I think are kind of unexpected because people always jump to the custard scene. That custard scene is vile.
Can't do
But
it.
like the embalming scene where like all of the
all
orifices
the eyes,
explode, like I'm like,
Are all
that's
goo.
pretty gross. And then the gurgling sound anytime the nurse's head is off is like so
I
gross.
love the nurse's design. The like
nurse-
her loose
yeah.
head. That scene is great when
Yeah.
he's just trying to like basically wrangle her into the basement.
And there was no mechanism unutilized by having
Yes.
this like almost severed head nurse. Like everything that you could have thought to happen, from feeding to gurgle, like all of it happened.
It literally
it was
all
so
happened.
fucking funny.
And just in keeping with last week's episode when we did Children of the Night, this is another movie where, dear Lord, does Peter Jackson pick some weird camera angles, but it totally works and makes sense in this. And like the two biggest examples I can think of both involve the uncle. One is a low angle shot that cuts off right at his belt buckle while he takes a piss. Like just the most bizarre angle that you could do that scene at. And then arguably one of my favorite sequences is just this bizarre scene of him holding two knives
The
in
knives
the
and
kitchen.
fast forward or whatever. Yes, that's iconic.
I want the Benny Hill theme like to just start playing. Like,
Yeah,
it just made
it's-
fucking sense.
I feel like that when I think about this movie, even before rewatching it after a decade or whatnot.
think of that scene?
I
Yeah.
think of that scene because it is so weird.
Yeah, well, they're
It's
like
like fever
superheroes.
dream.
Their ability
Yeah.
to not get bitten throughout this party while they're like
I
hand-to-hand
can tell you why
combat
though.
is amazing.
It's because it's magic. Because he's magic, and that's what makes this movie so much fun. I don't like zombies. So I had my zombie craze in college when like
Yeah.
Fast Zombies, like 2003, man. Only 10 years between this movie and 28 Days Later.
Wow.
But Fast Zombies hit, and I was obsessed with the concept. I would have nightmares about getting eaten by zombies 4 or 5 times a week. It was just this whole thing. But like, I definitely, it was way too much. I overdosed on zombies, and just didn't go to it anymore. But that's why the enduring zombie movies that I can still enjoy now are not Contagion movies, because Contagion movies are not fun. They're too fucking real. I mean, especially in 2023 after what we went through 3 years ago and all that, and still continue to go through. But like, this is all magic, and so it doesn't matter if they get goop in their mouth, and it's funny if they get goop in their mouth, and then he kisses Paquita's head and like a line of goo comes off of his mouth. I mean,
Dude,
like they're
is
fun little things.
Caked.
He's going to be
in-
a creature feature, right?
Yeah, he's going to be a creature feature. He is.
That's right.
It's his
Fuck yeah.
third ever convention, his first in the United States, and we're going to be
That's-
there, folks.
we're gonna
on
fucking
March
be there.
17th to the 19th in beautiful historical Gettysburg. Come and check out Horror Movie Night. More information to come.
It is mind-blowing
And heartbreaking.
how many original scripts are written every year but are never made.
So we seek out these scripts and bring them to life with full audio production and professional actors.
Check us out at Undiscovered Scripts,
Movies made of paper.
wherever you get your podcasts.
Free.
All right, Scott, you got a question for me?
I do. After picking this magic piece of cinema, how would you continue the night?
I'm going to pick a contemporary film. I'm going to pick another film that celebrates its 30-year anniversary this year. It is also a film similar to Dead Alive that represents kind of the last dabble in horror for a while for a infamous splattertastic director of the late 80s, early 90s. And I'm going to go with Army of Darkness. I feel like Peter Jackson
Fair.
and Sam Raimi, they're just hand in hand. 1993, they're both putting out what would kind of be the last true like gorehound movie for them. And I mean, talk about a movie that could have been PG-13, like Army of Darkness.
Oh.
Is tame as hell.
I actually think that it's. Are you trying to tell me that it's not PG-13?
It's an R-rated movie, yeah.
I never knew that. I always thought of it as PG-13.
But I mean, that kind of, from that point on, you know, Peter Jackson goes and makes Heavenly Creatures, and Sam Raimi makes, I think, A Simple Plan.
He'd do anything.
Yeah, like
I'm a dick. I'm a dick.
God damn it!
Oh,
but yes,
sorry.
they go in there. They start to like work their way through doing like more classically like, oh, these are films that could play at festivals, and these are films that could get. I think both of their films after these, I had to do the research, but I'm pretty sure if A Simple Plan was the movie he did after Army of Darkness, and Heavenly Creatures was the film that he did. That Peter Jackson did after Dead Alive, that both of them literally followed up their movies with films that were nominated for Oscars. So like,
absolutely fucking wild.
It's a crazy. I mean, I think that's also just like kind of a little dream success story that like you and your friends can make the most absurd shit that you want, and then you can get to a point like Sam Raimi where he's like, oh, I'm only going to make maybe one movie a decade now because I don't have to.
It is the dream. At some point, you want to not do your art anymore, except for when you want to do it.
Yeah.
Or get paid for it.
Yeah,
God
you don't want
bless.
to. No one. I think that certain people. I don't even think certain people. I think any director that you ask, it's like, all right, do you want to still be doing this when you're 60? The answer would be like, yeah, sure. But it'd be like, do you want to be having to do like commercials and all of like the shit that you did out of college to stay afloat? It's like absolutely fucking not.
No.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Kyle, what about you? Catching you while you're drinking.
Yeah, I have two.
Hit us.
I think I'm gonna go with The Gate.
Ooh, that's an interesting pick.
And I would probably put The Gate first, Dead Alive second.
Yeah.
I just think The Gate has a lot of fun effect stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Dead Alive. I mean, the thing that you'd said. And I had thought about this before. Obviously, I picked this one before. But the thing that you said about New Zealand trying to make it a PG-13 movie, I was like, you know, The Gate is this sort of like for kids, not for kids horror that just, and again with the special effects and stuff that they utilize and lean on. I just think it would just be a really fun night.
Yeah, it's a good.
I could
that.
get down with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go with From Dusk Till Dawn because they are so similar in the amount of blood used, but that's not the reason. The reason is because when Lionel beats somebody with their own limb, I think there's or he's using a limb to do something.
He grabs an arm to start the lawnmower.
That's right. Thank you. All I could think about was the limb guitar that the one mariachi guy in the mariachi band.
Yes.
I was like trying to rack my brain.
Beautiful craftsmanship.
What movies? Yes. That's what you like to call tonewood. But I was trying to think of all the movies because it's kind of a trope, right? Of someone getting beaten with their own limb, but that's the first thing that came to mind, and I was like, that would hit the spot. All right, Matt, what do you want to share with us this week?
So HBO Max, I saw that this was on HBO Max. I'd heard mostly good things about it. I've heard a couple people disagree with this. The Night House was added to HBO Max, so I gave it a watch. I think it's good.
Before,
like from like a year ago.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Wait, is that the one where it's like they find the schematics for their house, but it's a different house, and then it's like a question about what's real or something like that?
It's sort of like that. So the short version of the movie is that this woman's husband kills himself, and she keeps hearing his voice in the house and stuff like that. And then when she goes out into the woods, because she lives kind of off the grid in like this nice wooded area, she finds literally a duplication of her house in the woods. And it kind of unlocks like, was he cheating on her? Like, did he have any of these dark secrets? And it's actually a fun kind of like low energy, low stakes, like pseudo ghost movie for the most part. My biggest problem was like I had to read the wiki page to understand what I had seen in the last 10 minutes of the movie, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of like underwhelming in comparison to the rest of the movie. It's definitely not something that would ever fit our show because it's basically like a mostly good movie that's like not really bombastic, not really ridiculous, and then it just kind of has this like, I wouldn't even say a dud of an ending, but just like a kind of ending to tie it all up. But I mean, if you're into stuff like that, like, give it a watch. Like, it's not a bad way to kill 90 minutes. So that it's a very lukewarm review. It's never going to be on like my top list of anything, but I don't hate that I watched it.
I'm about a decade late on this one, but I watched The Master, Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master.
Okay. That's one of the only PTA ones I haven't seen, was that and Phantom Thread. Is this recommended?
Yeah. Really, I mean, unreal performances by Joaquin Phoenix and Philip Seymour Hoffman. Amy Adams is in it. She's great, but like clearly her character doesn't have a ton in this story, but fucking beautiful. I think it's shot on 65 or 70 millimeter, and like every shot is a goddamn painting. Like and I mean, which is PTA's whole vibe anyway. You know what I mean? Like especially once he gets the budget and the scale, and I mean, really fascinating. I mean, especially if I have an interest in Scientology as a Scientologist. No, I'm just kidding. But just like the whole, particularly like the psychology behind it all, and like sort of where it comes from, and then like this, I don't know. It's just really, really good. Not that you needed me to tell you that. But we watch so much shit. Me particularly, but I mean, I oftentimes don't pick a great movie to watch, right? Like I just, especially like comfort food, like, you know, just sort of like wind down stuff. And Carly and I were like, let's just watch something good. And man, it was fucking good. And it just reinvigorated a thing in me, filmmaking wise, that I was very appreciative of too. So
yeah,
I love that. So I just have two things. One is I'm going to start with the thing I didn't like, and I'm going to end with the thing I did like. And real quick, there's a movie that I want to say HBO Max suggested to me, or Hulu. It doesn't fucking matter. It's called The Cellar, and it was from maybe 2021.
Okay.
It stars Alicia Cuthbert.
Ooh.
And she's this I did not recognize her. It was wild. This movie was one of those, it was a blind watch. It just came up and it seemed interesting. I was like, this has given me a hole in the ground kind of vibe. It might be fun. The concept is that this woman purchases a house in Ireland, and they move in, and then the cellar is like bigger than it seems. And I was all about it. It seems real fucking cool because there was like this idea of Freemasonry and or like occult stuff to it. And then it got super weirdly Christian. And I mean that in that they started doing like some Lesser Keys of Solomon research, like into demons and demonology. And then they stopped and they were just like, oh, this is knowledge bad, you know, Jesus good. Is how it felt, and it was a real fucking bummer because it's like all the goodwill that they built in the first two segments of the movie kind of got pissed away in the third act, and it looked good. It had a cool concept. It just got real dumb. There were cool ways that they could have done it. I don't know who was responsible for it, but I was pretty upset. But I did finish Wednesday, which I know it's old by the time this comes out. Megan and I watched it and loved it. I think that it deserves all the praise it got. I think that it's a great return to form for Tim Burton. And I finished Midnight Club, which I feel like when Flanagan got released from Netflix, he just told us what the second season was going to be because then I didn't have to wait 2 years.
Yeah, he missed no details. He was just like, all right, here's everything that would have happened if this show didn't get canceled, which I'm still about to see what happens after the cliffhanger of Clone High USA 20 years later, because HBO Max just renewed it 20 years after the fact.
Yeah, Things are
Things
funny that
happen.
way.
He could come back. I mean, he shouldn't have spoiled it on Twitter, but Twitter's not going to be here forever. So
Twitter might not be here by the time this episode
Yeah,
comes out at
no
the rate things have been
fucking
going.
kidding.
Don't tease me. My only criticism, and it's light criticism, is that it wasn't out there enough. It felt a little safe. But that's fine. It was for the masses. That's it.
I also, and this is something that I've had an argument with the Bingetown kids about, and it stems all the way back to me loving Bly Manor and them feeling lukewarm towards it, and they felt lukewarm towards Midnight Club as well. But I think that Mike, and I think I cut this from last week's episode because we talked a little bit about Mike Flanagan there, but I think Mike Flanagan doesn't really give a shit if you want him to make a horror thing.
Yeah.
like
he just
I
wants
think
to tell the stories.
Yeah, like he likes horror and he likes using horror, but especially if you sit down and read that like Tumblr/Twitter post that he made explaining everything, like there's very little to no supernatural in this. But I think that that's what makes it beautiful, is that it's the horror of the thing is that these kids are going to die. There's nothing that's going to stop that from happening. They have a terminal disease, and it's more of like this beautiful exploration of like, how do you come to terms with that when you just know that you have a very finite expiration date coming up? Like it's, I would have loved to have seen a lot of the stuff that's described in that Twitter post. On the page, it doesn't hit me, but I'm willing to bet that if I had seen on the screen, I would have teared up at certain parts.
especially if I feel like if Flanagan, he's really, really good about existential stuff.
Better than most, I would say.
Yeah,
it's hard
yeah,
to
yeah,
get
yeah.
existential ideas emotionally across.
He's really good at just like the supernatural realm being as connected to the human realm as it could be. So existentialism, existential stuff is like that. It's like he rides that line. I mean, Dr. Sleep is another great example of that too. So
I think that's why
to see that in a teen world is like. I mean, that's such a big fear.
Yeah, I think that's why him and Frank Darabont have become so good at adapting Stephen King stuff, because I think Stephen King is another person who kind of doesn't give a fuck if you want him to write horror. Like, he's going to write what he wants to write, and I think that those are like two of the best directors of getting the idea of like, sometimes a horror story isn't really a horror story. Like, it's a people's story that horror stuff happens around them. And like, because you see that as much as we shout a lot of praise to the 90s Stephen King adaptations do not even a little bit get what Stephen King stories are actually about. They're just like, it's about the horror and that's it. And it's like, that's not like his best books are usually about the people and how they react to these otherworldly events that are happening to them. This is coming from one of the biggest graveyard shit fans in the world. Like, sometimes you do just want to see a giant bat monster, but I understand why Stephen King maybe was like, that's not exactly what my book was. All right, well, that was Dead Alive. Happy 30 years, Dead Alive. You did it. Great work. And we will be here next week, I guess, to talk about another movie that celebrates
another 30th anniversary.
Of equal, if not greater importance.
Very important.
Next week on Horror Movie Night.
You're listening to the Geekscape Network.